Hi everyone, welcome back to True Stories with Andrea. I'm Andrea. I want to welcome back all of our previous viewers, and I hope we have some new ones. If you know people who love true stories and true crime stories, share this page and we can continue to grow and bring these stories. So the story today happened in 1976. So people who are close to my age may actually remember this. I remember it. I was 12 years old. I was actually at summer camp in Michigan when this happened. In this story, there were 26 children who were actually buried alive. This remains to be one of the largest kidnappings in U.S. history. How in the world did a school bus full of children simply disappear? That's exactly what happened. The children's ages ranged from 5 to 14. This happened during the summer school session in July of 1976. James Schoenfeld, his brother Richard, and Frederick Newhall Woods IV watched a school bus load up with children. All three of these guys come from wealthy families. But all three of them, only being in their mid to late 20s, have already made a plethora of bad decisions. And they need to make some big money fast. The brothers James and Richard have already been convicted of grand theft auto. But because of their wealth and their connections, they were both given light sentences. They were only sentenced to probation, so neither of them did any jail time, which I don't think taught them the lesson that they needed to learn. Their lawyer pleaded that they were just dumb kids who made a bad choice. And he told the judge that they would never pose a threat to society. Unfortunately, the judge believed him, and these 26 children would pay the price for that decision. The three men knew exactly the route that the bus was going to take. The bus was being driven by Frank Edward Ray, also affectionately known as Ed by the local community, is preparing to bring the kids back from a summer class trip to the local fairgrounds. The kids had spent the day swimming in the fairgrounds pool and enjoying a very rare summer class field trip. The bus is cruising down a very lonely back road. There's barely any traffic on it, which is what the kidnappers are counting on. They've already raced well ahead of the school bus and are waiting in a white van off the shoulder of the road. As the school bus approaches, the van pulls out into the middle of the road, blocking the path of the school bus. Ed honks the bus's horn as he slows to a stop. He's already thinking what kind of idiot would pull to the shoulder and then block the road. He quickly looks back at the kids to make sure they're all okay, and when he looks back out the bus window, he's shocked at what he sees. Three men have exited the white van, all three wearing stockings over their head, so you couldn't make out their faces. All three of them are holding guns, and at this point they have them pointed right at Ed. They warn Ed not to try to put the bus in reverse or make any dumb moves, and then they signal for him to open up the bus door. Ed hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to do. He knows if he lets the armed men on the bus, who knows what will happen to the children. But then again, the men could shoot him through the glass windows, and then they would be able to enter the bus anyway. There's no way of locking the bus door, and even if there was, the emergency exit in the back would allow them to enter the bus anyway. Ed decides that it's probably better to cooperate at this point, so he says a quick prayer as he allows the three armed men onto the bus. He opens the door and immediately one man enters the bus. As he climbs aboard and the children see him, they all start screaming in fear. They had no idea what was going on. And why would they? Most of these were just little kids. At this point, the man shouts at the children and threatens them to be quiet. There was still a few scattered whimpers from the kids, but for the most part, they complied. Now the man tells the children to put their heads down and keep them down. Then he turns his attention to Ed and tells Ed to get out of the driver's seat and has him sit into one of the empty bus seats. Then the masked man sits in the seat across from Ed and points his gun at him the whole time. A second masked man climbed into the bus and sat in the driver's seat. Outside, the third kidnapper hopped into the white van and put it in gear. At this time, he started to drive off. He then moves the white van out of the way of the bus. Everything up to this point has gone smoothly. Not a single car has driven by to catch them. And so far, the kidnapping has only taken them less than a minute. The man in the driver's seat of the bus steps on the gas and the bus lurches forward as the man in the van follows behind. The man that was sitting across from Ed draws Ed's attention one more time to the gun and warns him, no hero stuff. Got it? Just sit there quietly and everything will be fine. He then repeats the last sentence out loud to the children. He wanted to make sure they heard the warning as well. Now the driver of the bus starts to leave the main road and heads down an unused road. Bus bounces violently now as he leaves the road. The driver accelerates as he's trying to get off the main road where he won't be seen by other vehicles. Finally, the bus arrives at Brenda Slough. That's a shallow branch of California's Chowchilla River. Now the driver pulls the bus into the surrounding foliage as deep as he possibly can. He was doing his very best to hide that large school bus out of view. As the white van pulls up next to the bus, the men signal for the children to get up and start forming a single file line down the center of the bus. Ed is asked to go first, and the gunmen never take their eyes off of the aging bus driver. Outside, the men uncover a second white van that had been hidden nearby in the brush. Both of these white vans had their windows painted black, and the inside was reinforced by sheets of plywood. Ed and the children are then split up into two groups and loaded into the two vans. When the doors to the van were slammed shut, there was absolutely no light inside the vans. And any little bit of sunlight that would have come through was covered up by the black paint and the boards inside the van used for reinforcement. At this point, a lot of the younger children are getting scared and they're beginning to cry. So Ed attempts to reassure the children. Unfortunately, his words fall on deaf ears. These kids are terrified, and why wouldn't they be? As the vans drive off, Ed notices they've left the dirt road and they've actually entered smooth pavement. And then the vans proceeded to drive for 11 hours straight. No bathroom breaks, no stops for food and water, just 11 hours of driving with terrified children. With the lack of circulation in the back of the van, it was getting very hot and stuffy. Can you just imagine how they were all feeling at this point? It's hard to. The kids haven't eaten or drunk anything for 12 hours. Heat stroke was a very serious concern in the back of these vans, but the drivers just kept driving them, and Ed continued to try and keep the children calm. The older kids were trying to keep the younger kids calm and even started some sing-alongs, which did help for a while. After almost 12 hours of straight driving, the vans finally stop. Once again, Ed is greeted at the back door of the van by a man with a gun who tells him to get out. The door was shut immediately behind him. He was led to a hole in the ground that had a ladder sticking out of it. He's told to climb down, but Ed hesitated. He can't see what's in the dark hole. There is no light, but there is a shotgun pressing at his back, which encouraged him to climb down the ladder. To Ed's relief, there is a small light flickering at the bottom of the hole. As his eyes adjust to the little bit of light, he realizes that he's actually in a truck trailer that has been buried under the ground. How scary is that? Above is a hole that the kidnappers had cut in the roof of the trailer. As he looks around, he spots a table at the head of the trailer. On the table, he sees a few jugs of water and a little bit of food. There was some peanut butter and cereal, several loaves of bread, and some other odds and ends. Once he sees the water and food, Ed realizes that they've been kidnapped. They also noticed that there were several dirty mattresses in the trailer. They were all different sizes and intended for the kids to sleep on. Now the children are all brought out of the vans one by one. As each child was lifted out of the van door would shut behind them and they would be taken to the hole in the ground with the ladder. As the children were being lowered into the buried truck trailer, Ed was doing his best to keep them calm. He didn't want to agitate the kidnappers or give them any reason to hurt any of them. The poor kids in the backs of the vans had no idea where they were being taken, so a lot of them had crawled back into the corners of the vans to avoid being taken out of the van, but that didn't help. The angry kidnappers would just climb in and drag them out and push them towards the hole in the ground. Finally consigning themselves to their fate, the last of the children finally climbed down the ladder and into the buried truck trailer. Suddenly the kidnappers dropped one roll of toilet paper into the hole and said, "We'll be back for you." Suddenly they could hear something very heavy being dragged above their heads. To their horror, they realized that the three men were actually covering up the hole with a heavy manhole cover. At this moment, Ed and 26 children had been buried alive. Aside from the crying of the children, the only other sound that could be heard is the whirring of fans in the trailer, which was good news to Ed. This means the kidnappers at least thought of the possibility of asphyxiation and had installed some sort of ventilation system to help keep the air moving and provide them with much needed oxygen. Where the wheel wells of the trailer were, the kidnapper had dug holes into the ground, clearly intended for them to use that as a restroom. Ed and one of the older boys had stuck their head down into the holes to see if there's any way to escape through these holes. Unfortunately, though, there was not. They were literally just holes dug into the soil. The holes only led to a small depression in the soil below the trailer, really not useful for anything other than for their intended purpose. Ed began pushing on the back door of the trailer, but to his dismay, it just confirmed what he was afraid of. They're buried 12 feet into the ground with no way to escape other than the hole at the top of the trailer the way they came in. But that's now been completely covered up with a manhole cover and who knows how much dirt. Now, Frederick Woods and brothers James and Richard can finally breathe a sigh of relief. They've got the most difficult and risky part of their plan well underway. The three men had actually driven the children to the Woods family quarry, where they had worked months in advance to bury the full-size truck trailer 12 feet under the ground. For the last week prior to the kidnapping, the three men had worked to secure the trailer and install a makeshift ventilation system. The trailer was literally impossible to find unless you knew where to look for it. And the quarry is hidden enough, plus a day's drive from the kidnapping site, that the three men were confident that they had pulled off nearly the perfect crime. Now, the only thing left to do is phone in their demands. They went to a payphone and dialed the number for the Chowchilla police station, but are met with a busy signal. They tried several more times and still got a busy signal. What they didn't realize is 26 children were missing. So you had the parents of 26 children calling the police station, trying to find out what's going on with their kids. They realized what was going on and understood why so many parents would be calling the police station. They decided just to go back home, relax, and they would call again in the morning. They knew the children were safe 12 feet under the ground, so they decided just to go back home and get some sleep. Meanwhile, the bus had been spotted by a search plane overhead, and so the police arrived. When police get to the location of the bus, they noticed tire tracks from 2 other vehicles. So they knew that there was at least 2 other vehicles that were involved in the abduction. For the terrified parents, this was mixed news. They really didn't know how to take it. On one hand, they're all terrified because their children had been taken, but on the other hand, there's evidence to show that the children may still be alive. The police tried to reassure the parents and let them know that this is probably a kidnapping and they would probably be hearing a ransom demand from the kidnappers pretty soon. This is what they all were hoping because they knew that there would be a chance to bring the children home alive. The Chowchilla police chief was completely overwhelmed with the events and the kidnapping of the children, so he had called the governor of California and requested help. Within an hour, 30 FBI agents have arrived, and now the hunt for the kidnappers is on. But for Ed and the 26 children who had been buried alive, things are becoming very lethal. They've been underground for half a day now. The food and water has run out, and the temperature inside the trailer is sweltering. Then suddenly one of the fans that was used to pump fresh air into the trailer quit working. Ed and the oldest boy, 14-year-old Mike Marshall, are the only 2 that are aware of what will happen if the fans stop working. Then the second fan began to fail, but they didn't tell the other children because they didn't want them to panic. So now they have no fans pumping fresh air into the trailer, but there was still room for things to get worse. They noticed that the trailer had been reinforced with wire, but that had long started to give way, and the trailer was starting to cave in from the top, from the weight of the dirt. Each time the wire fails, it sends some of the kids into crying fits. The dirt begins to fall in on top of them. Ed does his best to keep the kids from getting hysterical, as he knows their crying fits will suck up precious oxygen. The kidnappers had said they'd be back, but now with the fans out and the roof caving in, Ed now knows that escape is the only option. Even if they wait for the kidnappers to return, once they realize that the roof is caving in and there's no more ventilation system, it's unlikely that they have a second plan to keep Ed and the kids hidden. So Ed knows how serious it is and that they're on their own right now. And they may decide to just kill them all in order to keep them hidden from authorities. Ed enlists the help of 14-year-old Mike, and they start stacking the mattresses one on top of the other until they've built a stack tall enough that a couple of the older kids could actually get on the tall stack of mattresses and reach the hole at the top of the trailer. But there's not enough room for more than one person at the top of the mattresses to be able to push on the manhole cover, so they have to take turns. Ed and Mike realize that they face a triple threat. They have a chance of running out of oxygens now that the fans quit working. They also know that the roof could cave in at any moment, and they don't know where the 3 men are. So they're fully aware that those 3 men could be waiting for them outside the hole if they try to escape, at which time they would probably kill them all to avoid being discovered. But they now know that that's a chance that they have to take. Doing nothing and staying inside the trailer could be certain death. After continually pushing at the manhole cover and even using some boards that they found as part of the trailer to try and bang it open, Mike notices finally that the manhole cover had shifted just ever so slightly. Mike continues to push even harder, widening that tiny little gap. The children below explode into cheers, but he's still not able to move the cover far enough to be able to get out. He's able to finally reach his hand out, and he can feel that on top of the manhole cover are 2 large tractor batteries. They weigh at least 100 pounds each, so this is what they're dealing with now. Mike continues to work on the batteries, pushing them ever so slightly, inch by inch, until he finally moves them far enough to get the manhole cover open. When Mike finally manages to get the batteries off of the manhole cover, expecting to see freedom and fresh air, but he realizes that they're far from free. He notices then that they had built a wooden box over the top of the manhole cover. The box is only big enough for Mike to pull himself up into. It was too small for Ed to get up there and help him, So Mike knew if they were all going to survive, it was up to him now. He then begins pounding on the walls of the box. He's terrified right now that if he breaks through, he's going to be face to face with the 3 kidnappers. But he knew he had no choice, so he continues until he finally is able to break through the box. As he finally breaks through the walls of the wooden box, he realizes that the box has also been buried. So he begins to dig through the layer of dirt that was outside the box until he feels fresh air and light. Blinking his eyes to adjust to the sunlight that he hasn't seen in days, he's expecting to see the 3 kidnappers, but there's nobody around. Instead, he just sees hills and large trees. And as he climbs out and stands up and looks around, he realizes that they were buried in a large sand dune. If they hadn't escaped, there was no chance that anybody would have found them. One by one, he helps all of the children out of what would have been their tomb. They eagerly and excitedly suck up the fresh air. By the time the last child is out, it's already 8 p.m. Ed and the children have been buried alive for nearly 16 hours. Off in the distance, they hear the sound of heavy equipment and machinery. The children become fearful, wondering if it's the kidnappers. But Ed knows they have no other choice. They have to find somebody that can help them. Ed and the group make their way to the sounds of the machinery, and they spot a large group of men operating heavy equipment. Ed and the children rush out of the tree line to the absolute amazement of the workers. They had done it against all odds. They found their way to freedom. Ed and the children had been buried 100 miles from the kidnapping site. And as Frederick Newhall Woods IV and James and Richard Schoenfeld woke up from their exhausted sleep, they would turn on the news to find out that the group had escaped and had been rescued. It wouldn't take long for the police to zero in on Woods, and when police got a search warrant for Woods' father's estate, they found a draft of a ransom note and one of the guns used in the kidnapping. The kidnappers had already fled, but Woods would soon be captured in Vancouver, Canada. James Schoenfeld was captured the next day, while Richard Schoenfeld had turned himself in voluntarily 6 days earlier. All 3 men were given life in prison with the possibility of parole. Richard Schoenfeld was paroled in 2012 at the age of 77. His brother James had been paroled 3 years later at the age of 82. Frederick Woods, who was the heir to an estate worth $100 million, was denied parole 19 times. If he lives to see it, his next parole hearing will be in 2024. Now, I know this seems like a happy ending, and it is. It's a happy ending. Everybody survived. We had a couple heroes in this story, but in the long run, so many of these kids were just traumatized, and they carried a lot of emotional scars. So what do you guys think about this story? I think that both Ed and this 14-year-old young man, Mike, are both heroes. They did so many things right. What do you guys think? I love getting your input on these stories, so definitely let me know what you think in the comments below. I want to thank everybody for watching, and if you haven't already done it, click follow, like, and share. And I'll see you guys next time.